We got a good turnout today for an outstanding program. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce to you Bill Chana, former test pilot, or not test pilot, test engineer on the XF-92A. Bill, join me.
It's good to see so many my old friends here. I want to mention that this is being brought to you through the courtesy of San Diego Aerospace Museum. I have to always put in a plug for them. But I want to recognize the tremendous amount of work that's been done by the Convair volunteers in assisting the Aerospace Museum have on exhibit at the present time, and these are the airplanes that the volunteers put in shape for us. One is the Sea Dart, which is out in front of the museum. One is the PBY-5A, which is inside the courtyard, and the MiG-17 and the F-4, which are inside the courtyard. And of course, our newest addition was the Blackbird, which is outside the museum next to the Sea Dart. And at the present time, still not on exhibit, but being worked on, is the B-52 cockpit. Now that's the front end of the B-52 that was used here as a mock-up, I believe, for the cruise missile mock-ups. But I know that I'm going to ask all of those that are volunteers to stand here in a few minutes, but I want to especially recognize Joe Miller, who's kind of been heading up the group, and Frank Signorelli, and Ken Lemley, who's sort of been their right-hand their engineer. Besides those three, why don't you all stand if you worked on if you're a volunteer working on the aircraft? Will you please stand? And I want you to give them a hand. The museum is really appreciative of this effort. There are at least 40 to 50 men that are Convair retirees that work on these airplanes over at the Convair seaplane ramp. And the work that they do is really great, and it's really appreciated by the museum. Getting down to the subject for which we're here, and that's a supersonic wedge or delta wing. Today, the delta wing is commonplace. Everybody's got a delta wing. All over Europe, they're flying airplanes with delta wings. The Concorde is a delta wing. But going back to about 1945, the delta wing wasn't heard of. And so I wanted to point out that there were three people at Vultee Field just before it became Consolidated Vultee, it was already Consolidated Vultee, but they were at Vultee Field. And these three people were testing a model that had a very highly swept wing, but a narrow chord wing, and they were having some problems with that in the wind tunnel. And suddenly they decided that they ought to fill it all in and see how it would work. And they filled in that highly swept thing, and essentially turned out to be a delta wing, and it worked very well. Now I'm really pleased to say that we have two of the men that were involved with that. The third one has passed on some time back, but we have with us today Frank Davis, who is one of those men. And Frank, as you know, was president of Fort Worth and president of Convair and president of Convair Fort Worth and all of those various combinations. And then we have Ralph Schick, who was the chief of aerodynamics at Convair. And this time I'd like to have Frank Davis stand. He's right over here. Give him a hand. And I'd like to have Ralph Schick stand over here. It was in 1981 that Ralph and Adolph Burstein and Frank Davis and myself were back in Dayton, and we actually got an opportunity to go over to the restoration area and see the old XF-92, which is in storage at the Wright Field Museum. And also at the time that they were there, they were recognized by the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics to receive the Aircraft Design Award based on the work that they did in developing the Delta Wing back in the 1945 time period. So it was an honor that was to be bestowed upon them, and they certainly deserved it. As a result of the XF-92 effort, several other aircraft developed with Delta Wings, and today I'm going to show you a movie that shows both the XF-92 and the Pogo and the Sea Dart and the YF-102. It happens to be a status report which was completed at the end of the YF-102, so that we do not have any film on the F-106 or the B-58 that was produced in Fort Worth. But one of the first airplanes that they were almost together time period, 1953-54, but one of the first ones was the Convair Pogo. And we all remember the Convair Pogo that took off vertically and transitioned over and flew at high speed and then came back down, landed on his tail. It was actually the very, very first airplane to be able to make a transition like that. In other words, to take off vertically, go to level flight, and come back and land. Prior to that, there were no airplanes that had ever done that maneuver. That particular airplane was flown here in San Diego at Brown Field and a couple of times off of Lindbergh Field. And we have with us today the one man, the only man that has ever flown the Pogo, and that's Skeets Coleman. Skeets, stand up. Right about at the same time was the Sea Dart development. And of course, we all know what the Sea Dart looks like, particularly if you've been down to the Aerospace Museum. You see our number 3 Sea Dart sitting out there out in front. And I guess you all remember that I believe it was on November 4th, 54, that Sea Dart was coming over the bay for a demonstration flight when it exploded over the bay. I will say exploded, although that's not the accurate description of what went wrong. That takes a little bit longer to describe. But it did end up in the bay, and our very, very good friend Chuck Richburg was killed in that accident. Immediately after that, several other pilots started flying the Sea Dart, and one that flew it most of the time after that, and did most of the rough water tests out in the ocean with the Sea Dart, is Jack Long, and I'm real happy to say that Jack Long is with us today. Jack, stand up. Now, getting back to the old XF-92, and I'm just going to tell you a couple of stories about that, and then we'll show the movie, and then after the movie, I'm going to have Jack and Ralph and Skeets and Mr. Davis here to put their chairs up here, and we'll have some questions and answers. I'm sure you may have some questions you'd like to ask them. When it comes around to telling stories about the XF-92, I think I could make an hour's presentation of that in itself. But I would like to mention what happened on the first flight of the XF-92. I know Ralph and Frank and myself. I know Les Green over here and John Wiley. And I don't know if there's anybody else that was there for that first flight on September 18th, 1948. But Sam Shannon was a pilot. And I remember as we were walking out to the airplane after our pre-flight meeting, I know he turned to me and he said, and to some of the others that were around, he says, if you see me going off in that direction and kind of going out of sight, he says, you'll know I can't steer the damn thing. Sam and Bill Martin, who was the other pilot that flew it for Convair, both Sam and Bill have passed on. But they flew 47 flights on the airplane and accumulated about 20 hours of flying time before it was turned over to the Air Force. Sam and Bill were both bomber pilots, having had all that World War II experience on B-24s, PB-4Y2s, PBYs, and PB-4Y3s, no, PB-4Y2s and PB-2Y3s, that's what it is, seaplanes. I don't want to act or sound like I'm critical of Sam Shannon and Bill Martin. They were the tops as far as test pilots were concerned. But you can see with all of that experience that they had in the big airplanes, they basically flew the XF-92 almost like a bomber. They didn't fly it like a fighter. And I'll tell you in a minute, the two Air Force people that came aboard to fly that airplane after we finished our flying. One of the stories we like to tell about Sam Shannon was that we put in a wire recorder in the airplane, which is like a tape recorder today. That's so that you could, so the pilot could transmit a message on the tape or on the wire while he's flying. And a lot of you remember Sam. He was not too talkative, but Sam, we put the wire recorder in and checked it out, working fine and all that. And so on the first flight, the wire recorder is in when Sam was flying the airplane. This was not the very first flight of the airplane. We didn't put the wire recorder in until a little later. But so I'm the one that listening to the wire after the airplane comes back. So we turned on the wire recorder, and it says, pretty soon it said you could hear the engine wind up, you know, and pretty soon you heard Sam said, turning the wire recorder on at 5:22. And I thought, well, that's good. And then it went on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I thought, oh, gee, the wire, something happened. Something went out of commission. And I said, well, I might as well run it to the end of the wire here. And pretty soon it says, turning the wire recorder off at 6 a.m. So Sam didn't talk to anybody on that flight. We had it wired so that no matter what he said, it would pick up his voice. One other thing about the XF-92, and I think John Wiley and Les Green here will remember that we suddenly developed a rumble in the airplane. Getting up to the higher Mach numbers, the pilots reported a bad rumble. And of course, everybody at that time was figuring, you know, it's duct rumble because of the kind of ducting we had going to the engine and everything. And it turned, and so we had just about everybody you could think of come up there, try to solve this problem for us, particularly the people that had all the fancy high-frequency testing equipment to find out if we could pinpoint this rumble. And so one day Bill Martin was up doing this, and sure enough, he got the rumble, and before he got a chance to reduce speed, because when you reduce the speed, the rumble would go away. Before he got a chance to reduce the speed, the rumble went away. And he said, I don't have any rumble anymore. So he came back home. And when we look at the airplane, we have to remember now, we did 5 or 6 flights trying to find out what was causing this rumble. When he came back down, he says, it's interesting. He says, when I tried to call the tower on the way in, I couldn't get them. And we looked at the airplane, and the little antenna that was sitting up behind the canopy was missing. A knife antenna, and it just was missing. And that's the thing that was rumbling all the time. Never rumbled after we put a new antenna on there. Okay, then the 2 pilots that were chosen to fly this airplane that were Air Force pilots. One was the man with the well-known name Major Chuck Yeager, and the other one was Colonel Pete Everest. And they were 2 hotshot fighter pilots. They'd been through World War II. Both of them had been shot out of the sky and parachuted. And it wasn't until I read Yeager's book that I realized how bad it was for him to escape from where he had parachuted to. Anyway, they were really good pilots. And I'll just say this, that on the very first flight, Sam Shannon was on the ground. We watched Yeager take off. And he took off and flew around a while. And pretty soon, here was this airplane out on the horizon, our airplane, coming in. And Shannon said, well, it looks like he's coming in for a landing. And then pretty soon he got a little bit closer and says, but the gear is up. The gear is up. Oh, get the gear down, Chuck. Get the gear down, Chuck. And he come a little bit closer, and all of a sudden, he went by us at about 300 miles an hour, and he went up there and he spun the airplane round. This was his first flight. Unfortunately, the XF-92 had never been rolled during the Convair flight testing. We had measured rate of roll, but we never rolled it like that. Yeager, when he came down off the ladder to the airplane, he said, oh my goodness. He says, give me something like this with F-86 guns and I'll shoot anything out of the sky. I want to mention at this point in time that if it hadn't been for Chuck Yeager and for Frank Davis over here, the two of them, there would never have been any F-102s or F-106s. Those two men went to both Yeager and Frank Davis and convinced the Air Force that there was a good vehicle, a good airplane. One other little story that is kind of humorous, and that is that there was only two of us up there during the Air Force trials. Myself as a flight test engineer and one of the quality control men. I forget his name right now. But we were the only two up there, and the Air Force now was maintaining the airplane, and the Air Force was flying it. Well, Chuck Yeager, he liked to talk down his data. He had a flight test engineer, Air Force flight test engineer, and the Air Force flight test engineer and I would sit in a Jeep and listen to the radio, and Chuck Yeager would talk down, elevator position, 3.5 degrees, 3.5 Gs, and so on. And we were just writing frantically as fast as he could talk. We told him we had a wire recorder, and we told him we had a photo panel, and we had all that. No, he says, I like to talk it down, and that's what I'm going to do. In one of the pre-flight meetings, somebody from the Air Force, I think it was a contracting officer, said something like, I don't know that we should be talking this stuff down, Chuck. He says, we don't know who's listening. It might be on the same frequency. And Chuck says, well, I thought I'm going to still do it. He says, well, just add 10,000 feet to the altitude and 100 miles an hour to the speed, and we'll just confuse the heck out of them. Well, it turns out that in the pre-flight meetings, the chase pilot was not in that meeting. And the chase pilot was Pete Everest at this time. Pete and Chuck used to exchange. One time Chuck would fly the XF-92, and Pete would be the chase, or the next time Pete would fly it, and Chuck would be the chase plane pilot. Well, anyway, Chuck Yeager released the brakes and went down the runway and climbed up, and of course, right behind him, those guys are such good pilots, right behind him was the chase plane. And Chuck said, I'm climbing out at 350 knots. And Pete Everest came in and he said, hey, Chuck, I'm reading 250. Is everything okay up there? And before another word was said, Chuck says, I'm going through 20,000 feet. And Everest says, Chuck, there must be something wrong. We're at 10,000. And Yeager says, why the hell don't you get in a little closer? And Pete Everest said, if I was any closer, I'd be inside your cockpit. Anyway, Air Force guys really flew that airplane, and they loved it. Besides those two Air Force people, while we were still up there, they ran through a series of checkouts for about 7 or 8 other Air Force pilots. And once they got the hang of it, they just loved it. It was a beautiful airplane. It had a lot of good characteristics, even though it was a flying mock-up, and it was the thing that led to the F-102s. The Air Force had 25 flights and 17 hours of flying. One other thing I'll mention is that Pete Everest is the only one, to my best knowledge, up to the time that we were there, during this period, that actually took the XF-92 supersonic. he actually dove it down and got a little flicker in the Mach meter, and which indicated he went 1 point something over the speed of sound. And so, and of course, you're going straight down in that airplane to acquire that. So, but Pete Everest is the first one to go supersonic in the XF-92. I think in its later years, when it came back here and they put in an afterburner and all this type of thing, and NASA started flying it, etc., which I know nothing about those tests other than what I read, the airplane did go supersonic more often. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do at the present time then is show you this movie, which is called the Supersonic Wedge, or I like to call it the Delta Wedge, but it shows the XF-92. It shows Yeager getting in the cockpit. It almost looks like Yeager made the first flight, but you have to take all that with a grain of salt when you show I guess when you're showing a progress report to the Air Force, you better put Yeager in there. And so they had him in there, and you'll see that. And I think you'll enjoy this. And right after this, we'll have some chairs. We'll bring our chairs up here, and you'll have a chance to ask these gentlemen some questions. Okay?
This is the story of a victory on the frontiers of flight. It begins with a blueprint from which an airplane grew. A new kind of airplane with a three-pointed wing like the Greek letter delta, with another big triangle for a fin. Its Air Force number was XF-92A. X for experimental, F for fighter. A very fast fighter if predictions came true. But there was much to learn. It was 1948, a long time ago as time is counted in aviation. And not much was known about flying at the speed of sound. To get the feel of this new kind of wing, high-speed runs were made on the flat desert at Edwards Air Force Base under strict military secrecy. At last, the first flight was at hand. Would this new wing be a success or a total flop, as some skeptics insisted? It was up to the 92A to find the answers. The date, September 18th, 1948. First Delta was in the air. That first successful flight was only the beginning. For nearly 5 years, test pilots put her through her paces, including downhill flight at the speed of sound. As with every test program, there were discouragements as well as successes. But out of it all came the conclusion the Delta wing would have many advantages at the speed of sound and beyond. And so to the world of flight had come a new shape, the Delta wing. A shape that was soon to appear on a whole new breed of high-spirited aircraft. Meanwhile, other Convair designers were at work on a different project, a new type of seaplane fighter. And then because of the success of the XF-92A, the Delta wing was applied to a seaplane. jet seaplane, the Sea Dart. Here in slow motion, the art of her design shows clearly. Spray is thrown to the sides, away from the air ducts that feed the engines. Water skis quickly lift the hull off the water for easier takeoff. Behind, a cloud of steam from the jet blast of her tailpipes. Once in the air, the Sea Dart skis are tucked up into her hull, and her kinship with the XF-92A is obvious. This Delta wing was the flying wedge that split the sound barrier and gave to the Sea Dart the title World's First Supersonic Seaplane. With her Delta wing, landings are made at relatively low speed and as gracefully as a water bird. And her speed is matched by utility. For her, every sizable strip of water is a ready-made landing field. Bays, lakes, rivers, the Sea Dart can land on them all. Thus, the Delta wing advanced the cause of air power by sea. One of man's longtime dreams is an airplane that would take off straight up. Now it seemed possible, with an engine that could pull a plane up by its bootstraps, and the Delta wing. When the plane was built, its first tests were made in this huge building at Moffett Field, California. It was nicknamed Pogo Stick, officially Navy XFY-1. No plane had ever flown like this before, so a test harness was invented. The plane was actually flying inside the building, but should anything go wrong, strong cables would prevent disaster. All went well, and Pogo Stick was ready for free flight. Straight up, the first in history. What now had to be found out was, can Pogo smoothly shift over to straight and level flight once in the air? This is where the Delta wing is so important. For with this wing, a stall is next to impossible. Here is an airplane that can operate from the deck of a ship, from a clearing in the jungle, or the top of a big building. Yet in flight, it probably is the fastest propeller fighter ever flown. To land, Pogo points its nose skyward. With an ordinary wing, there would be great risk of a stall, and the plane might fall out of control. But with the delta wing, it is a graceful maneuver, almost like penmanship in the sky. This is why Pogo is called the plane that can land on a dime. And its wing stems straight from the Delta XF-92A. Now comes the airplane in which the Delta heritage runs strongest of all. Blooded offspring of the XF-92A, U.S. Air Force F-102. She will go into service with Air Defense Command, U.S. Air Force, on the team that guards our nation from enemy attack. This distinguished team includes not only people of the Air Force, but civilians, serving as aircraft spotters and in the filter centers, keeping watch on the ramparts of freedom. And this plane will be the instrument of that team. Her destiny? A killer. Under that sleek skin, there lies the electronic magic of her deadly trade. Sensitive radar to sniff out an enemy in the reaches of the sky, by night or day, in cloud or storm. And a lethal cargo of armament to fling into the vitals of an enemy, with her very own special brand of electronic wizardry. All in all, an airplane calculated to give pause to any enemy who might have designs on our country. Thus, the progress in Delta wings to date. It has come from many hands and brains. In the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, and Convair, designer and builder of the planes. It is progress that will continue, and of the challenges that lie beyond tomorrow.
Yeah, right up here. And I got him. Yeah. By the way, I did mention a few people that were there to see the XF-92 take off the first time. I know, however, that in this room there probably a lot of people had something to do with the Delta Wing program. Either the XF-92, the Sea Dart, the Pogo, F-102s, F-106s, or even B-58 in Fort Worth. If you did, would you stand up? I'd like to give you a hand. Everybody that had something to do with the Delta Wing. Very good. Well, that's great. Okay, the way we're going to work this is if you've got a question, if I hear it properly, I'll try to repeat it, and then we'll give it to whoever I think is best to answer it, or if you want to direct the question at a specific person, just say so. Any questions? Yeah, right there. Ski. Oh, well, first of all, the question was, at one time they used the single ski on a Sea Dart. The inquirer said, obviously, it wasn't successful. Well, I think we can counter that with a reply here by Jack Long, who flew both the double ski, the single ski, the short ski, in the bay, in the ocean, and all that. Jack?
I'll stand up here.
You can use that. Yeah. Stand up or whatever.
I've been sitting, I'll stand up. You know, he didn't give me a chance to make an opening remark before I answer the question, but I want to tell you the reason I'm here is because of Sam Shannon. Sam Shannon gave me the job as a pilot in the flight test department, and also after Rich was killed, he gave me a chance to take over the Sea Dart program. And I have to tell you two little stories. He told stories about Sam, but I don't know if you know it, Sam's nickname was Silent Sam because he didn't speak much. I don't know how many of you had interfaces with him, but he sure didn't do a lot of talking. I was told, I wasn't there at the time, when Sam first took the Sea Dart out in December of 1953, and he came back in and they was going to have kind of a little debriefing down there at the ramp, and everybody was anxious and needles and pens to see what he had to say, and somebody finally broke the ice and said, "Sam, what do you think?" And he says, "Well, I'll say one thing, it's different." And I got to share one other story with you about Sam. I had been testing. The reason when I got started on the soon after Richard was killed, we had a single ski, and I'm going to answer the gentleman about the ski. I was waiting for my clearance to come through from Washington, from the Navy Department, to get into Sea Dart. And this was 55 days after Rich was killed on the 4th of November, and this was 29 December. And Sam had the pink eye. Now, that sounds silly, but he had the pink eye and he couldn't fly it. So Captain Slauson verbally authorized me to get in the Sea Dart. And I'd never even been in a cockpit before. But anyway, I flew that for quite some time, and I'll tell you that in just a second. But the thing, that when the number 3 airplane, the new twin ski airplane, that's sitting down in front of the museum, was getting ready to fly it, and it was going to be the first flight. Well, as I said, Sam doesn't have a lot to say, so I always call Sam Mr. Shannon. I guess I was brought up as a Southern boy to respect my elders and this sort of thing. But anyway, I went in to see Sam, and I says, "Mr. Shannon," I says, "I'm going to make the first flight on the new airplane." We just assumed he didn't tell me I wasn't going to, and I said, he says, "Well, why don't you sit down and tell me what you're going to do?" So I sat on the edge of a chair and told him briefly what I was going to do. And I got to tell you this, what a great man this gentleman was. You know what he said to me? "Well, Billy Jack, be careful." Be careful. I don't think you can do that in today's environment. So anyway, the gentleman asked about the single ski. The single ski was the successful version of the Sea Dart. We had some problems to begin with it, so we resolved that. But the single ski, the big single ski, never had the vibration problem that we had on the twin ski. Even the final configuration of the twin ski was unacceptable from a vibration and pounding viewpoint. The single ski did not have that, and I did a number of open sea tests on both airplanes, and on the single ski, in January 1956, I actually took the airplane out in a Sea State 5, and I don't know how many of you people are nautical, but we had 6 to 9 foot swells, and one swell was measured 12 feet with a 2-foot chop on top of that, and I was able to land in it, taxi around, and then take off again, and I got to admit it was pretty wild, but we made it. But the answer was, even the Navy said that the single ski was a satisfactory configuration. And it's interesting, there's a fellow named Thornburg that actually, who was in the hydrodynamic group that designed this thing, and he later on was at Lockheed. And about 15 years ago, Lockheed was proposing to NATO to build a Mach 2 interceptor that had a crank delta wing, and it had the same ski that was on the big single ski here. So the answer was, I thought it was great.
Another question? Yeah, back there. The pogo is in existence. It's in a storage area at the Garber Restoration Area at the Air and Space Museum in Washington. I can answer that one. There was a time when our museum here made a request of the Air and Space Museum to have it loaned to us so we could have it on exhibit here. But at the time, we were talking about putting it outdoors, like where the SR-71 is now, the Blackbird. And the museum used that as at least their reason why they did not want to give it to us on loan, because it would be outdoors and would deteriorate from the weather and so on like that. That's where it stands right now. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, there were two pilots that shortly after Skeets completed flying the airplane, they brought the airplane back to Brown Field, and they built a big test rig like they had at the Moffett Field hangar, so that they could catch the airplane. And there were two pilots, one Myers and the other Knabel, just a minute. Whoop. Knabel and Myers did a lot of flying it in the test rig at Brown Field. And we have a pretty good report written by Bob McGarry, who was the sort of the flight engineer and right-hand man of Skeets and the other fellas. And about the time they were about to have either Knabel or Myers fly the airplane in full transitions, they ran into gearbox problems, and they decided that they would stop all flying on the airplane. Now, the thing that reference is probably being made to the fact that Johnny Knabel was given the opportunity to fly the airplane at Lindbergh Field, and he got about 4 or 5 feet in the air and got confused due to the control system, which is a long story we could talk about for another hour. But he landed and never flew the airplane again until in the test rig at Brown Field. Oh, yeah, I'm sure it was, yeah. Ask Skeets a question about the pogo. Come on, anybody got a question on the pogo? Well, I'll ask Skeets a question on the pogo. Skeets, whoever got you involved and interested in that pogo in the first place?
Probably Bill Chana. But I don't really remember. It was too long ago. But it was a revolutionary concept, and I certainly was attracted to it. And luckily for me, there weren't too many volunteers, so I was able to get the job. But that, what the gentleman said before about the Johnny Knabel, he flew the thing, it was more than 4 or 5 feet in the air, and he flew for quite a bit of time in Lindbergh. And we'd put a grid up on top of one of the hangars, and we're trying to talk to him. And I was the one talking to him, and I think I probably confused him more than anything else because I was always a little late to his reaction time. But he got almost uncontrollable, and we finally got them to shut it down and drop it back in. Other than that, I don't think anybody ever made a free flight. Somebody, oh, that was me, but we did more than one flight. We did about 4 out of Lindbergh. What was really unusual about it is we had to take off runway 31 out, what's the runway is never used anymore, and fly out over the harbor, and had to come back in and land the other way. It's the only way they would allow us to fly out of there.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, the Moffett Field hangar, which is 200 feet high, probably the biggest indoor hangar in the world outside of the one down in Cape Canaveral, was a great training place, but it turned out that it was more trouble than it was worth in some respects. And that is that this airplane, with its tremendous downwash and everything, just like a helicopter, if you ever notice, helicopters don't land in revetments with walls on all sides of them because you create a well effect. And the turbulence from the downflow just comes right back into the prop and is very destabilizing. And this is one of the things that happened in the hangar. Is if you flew for, I forget how many minutes now, but the downwash would destabilize the propeller thrust, and we just start wallowing all over the place. And many a times I had to call McGeary and say, "Catch me, Bob, catch me," because I couldn't control it anymore. And he would, had a snubbing action on each one of the fins and on the nose, and he would release that and it would just snub the airplane up tight. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to add something here because I had the opportunity to be chase pilot for Richburg. I was flying a Navy AD-5 Skyraider, a bailed aircraft to us, and that 3350 had a rating of about 2,500 horsepower. I think it was the third flight that I was chasing Skeets down at Brown Field. He was in idle power, and he had so much residual thrust and idle power that I had that AD-5 just about two-blocked all the way. All the power I could get of it on the inside of the turn is all I could do to stay with him. So I'd like to just give you an idea how fast his airplane was in idle power. And I want to make another comment that at one time, before Richburg was killed, I was supposed to be kind of a understudy to Skeets to maybe sometime fly the pogo stick. Well, when Richburg was killed, I took over the Sea Dart. Well, I got news for you. I was glad I never had to fly that beast.
I would like to mention that as a result of Skeets having successfully flown the pogo, he was awarded the Harmon Trophy by the President? Yeah, by the President of the United States at the time. So that was a great accomplishment. Another question? How about a question for Frank? Yeah, back. We can hear you. Is that secret, Skeets? Oh, not as much as the Camel commercials, he says. And they didn't smoke either at the time, ever, I guess. Any other questions? Yeah, right here. Yeah, yeah. Oh, you mean up at Moffett Field? Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I see, one of the snubbers that held down the... Well, I think the first time things didn't work, but that's all right. Okay, here's some more storytelling.
This is a great one. Skeets can tell you this better than I can, but I want to tell it anyway because he has a tendency to kind of soften the stories. be more dignified. But the point was that Skeets was worried about the ejection seat. And so finally they set it up down at Lindbergh Field, and they put it up on this big dolly type device they had in the vertical position, and had a big circus net behind to catch it. And they had a lanyard tied to the ejection lever to fire the thing out. And they had a countdown, 1, 2, 3, jerk, jerk, jerk. It didn't eject. You can imagine how he felt.
Well, that's a good story, but in deference to Convair and to the Navy, we had done extensive testing. And in fact, we did them at the old glider port out at Torrey Pines. And that seat with all its lanyards and everything for an automatic extension of the chair from the pilot and the parachute to deploy was done many, many times. Unfortunately, when they set up this rig in Convair, and there's about 3,000 people watching, some economy-minded guy decided to use an old firing pin. It really didn't malfunction. They put in some things that couldn't have functioned. It got some bad publicity, but it was not the fault of either the designers or the Navy or Convair.
Frank's got to add to that, I think.
After watching this array, I know you can't help but feel that you can design an airplane to do damn near anything. And that's exactly how the Delta Wing came about. In the original configuration, the XF-92 was intended as simply a flying test vehicle to test the feasibility of the Delta Wing. But the airplane for which it was intended at that time was one for which there was not a power plant in the world that would do it. It was an impossible set of requirements. The airplane we envisioned at the time was to be powered by rockets and ramjets. And that was where the designation F-92 came from. And it was a very interesting airplane, but the Delt came up as a part of meeting an absolutely impossible set of requirements. And watching the Pogo and the Sea Dart, that was two more absolutely impossible sets of requirements that we had fun designing airplanes to try to meet.
Yeah, I'm sure that besides Frank having been president of Convair and Convair Fort Worth and so on, many of you may not know that Frank started at Vultee Field, I believe it was in 1945 or 6? 40? In 1940, and then during the war he was a test pilot at Vultee and flew everything that Vultee ever produced, including the first flights on many of the first airplane to have a turboprop in front and a jet in the back, and that was the P-81. Yeah, P-81. Right. And okay, any other questions here? Yeah.
Which engine did the XF-92 have? Which engine?
Was GE
I-40.
I-40-23, I think.
What was the thrust rate?
Not 3,700 pounds, something like that, or dry, and I think it was higher wet. Yeah. Then, later on, and all the pictures that you saw here were after they put in a later version with afterburner. Yeah. No, Adolf Burstein passed away 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, over there. Well, the XF-92, as we've been referring to it here, like Frank alluded, got its name or got its designation XF-92 when the XP-92, which was the rocket ship that Frank mentioned, was canceled. Prior to that, when we first went to Edwards, the airplane was not known as the XF-92 right away. It was the 7002, or, if you'll excuse the expression, 7 balls 2. That's what we called it. Okay. Any questions for Ralph or for Frank here? Yeah, Jack. Frank, you can explain that. The yellow canary term? You can't? Okay, how about Ralph? Can you? There you go. Here's Ralph. Here's the...
Here, sit here. I'm working my way through the box.
You can just hold it up to your mouth, that's all. The question is, can you explain the term yellow canary?
The question was asked by R.E. Craig, who used to be one of my main assistants.
And he's here today.
That's him that just asked the question.
Oh!
Who was an excellent engineer. The yellow canary was brought about by experimenting in the wind tunnel. And this is about the time that the area rule concept came into being. And we found that by contouring the body in a certain fashion, shaping it kind of like Marilyn Monroe's body, we could go faster for the same thrust. So it became known as the F-102 MM standing for you-know-who. About this time, we found that there were certain things we could do to the original body to give it a better area concept. And one of the things we did was build some, you probably remember the movie a while ago. If you notice those bulges on the back end of the fuselage, near where the fuselage intersects the wing, we built some bulges out of some clay and stuck them quickly on the wind tunnel model. And the people nicknamed them the Yellow Canary because they were made out of yellow clay, and they looked kind of like canary bodies. But it did reduce the drag supersonically.
Okay, any other questions? Well, we've taken up a lot of your time. Oh, yes. Okay, sure, Jack. Jack's got a question. No, he's got an answer. Before we get the question.
First, I want to say this. I want to thank everyone here that ever worked on any airplane that I ever flew at Convair, and I just say I never had any more than a mild hiccup on any airplane. I flew the F-102 at Edwards and the Sea Dart, and all I got to say is my hat's off to all of you, and I think it's just great the work that you've done, all of you.
Yeah, good. Any of you gentlemen want to say parting word to our group here? Okay, any other questions? I think that concludes, and we thank you very much for coming out this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Skeets. A little token of our appreciation, Convair alumni baseball caps for all of you. Thank you very much. How about a hand, folks?
Hey, I got you.
Okay, we're going to carry on with the meeting now. We have a very special